Everybody, we are up to the Mishnah. Daf Yud Aleph, Amid Aleph, 11a1. 11a1. Okay? Yud Aleph, Amid the thing. So we're going to continue to go here. Here we get to a thing. As you all know, just give me a second. As you all know, give me a second. Give me a second. Yeah. As you all know, when one becomes a Nazir completely. Okay? You understand what I'm saying? In other words, he takes on everything. No wine, no cutting the hair, no being contaminated from the dead, mace. But look at our Mishnah. Mazgulayas hakos. If they poured the wine for him, va'amar, and he said, Hareini nazir mimenu. No, I don't want this cup of wine. Okay, he's at a meal. They're pouring him wine. And he says, I am a nazir from this cup. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Reza Nazir. You're a complete Nazir. You didn't simply, it's not simply a neder against this cup. It's a Kabbalas Nazirus in totality.
Right.
Maisa be'isha achas. There was a case with one woman. Shahaisha shikoiro. She was drunk. Umaz galaya sakais. And they were pouring her more wine. And she ba'amra, and she said, Hareini nazira mimenu. I am a nazir from it. I'm a nazira from it. Don't, this cup is, I'm a nazir. I don't want any more. Amru chachamim loy niskaven zu elaloyma. This woman only meant to say, Hare hu alai carbon. This cup is like to me a carbon, meaning it's a neder. This cup I will not drink. But what I am not, she is not a nazir complete. Clearly, Frank the Gemara, my solicitor, right? My solicitor. Then our Mishnah is contradictory. Umra Reisha, the Reisha first says somebody who's being poured a cup of wine, and he says, Hareini Nazir, Mimenu, I am a Nazir from this cup. He's a complete Nazir, Hareza Nazir, V'adatani, and then you bring a case, Maisa B'isha Achas, and that she's a drunk, and they're pouring her wine, and she says, I'm a Nazira from this cup. It's not, it's only for this cup and not a complete Nazirus. Alma Bahayu da Aser, from this cup that the Aser, but every other wine's permitted. So we've got a contradiction in our Mishnah. We have to look at the Mishnah like it's missing some words, and we have to put in some, we have to edit it. If they poured a cup of wine for him, and he said, I'm a nazir from it. Harez and nazir, he's a complete nazir, not just from this cup, but from all cups. But if he's a shikker, he's a drunk. He's not a nazir, he's merely forbidden to this cup. To this specific cup, it's like a neder to this specific cup. My tama, what's the reason? Because it's like he's saying about this cup, the shikara, the drunk, it is forbidden to me like a sacrifice. If you're going to say, then he should have said so. He should have said straight, this cup is like a carbon to me, is like a sacrifice to me. Why did he use the language of Nazirus? Savar, because he thought, they see that I'm a drunk. They're going to keep on pushing me with wine. They're going to keep on pouring me more cups of wine. I will say something that I am a Nazir, and that will be absolute to them, and that will stop them from giving me more wine. Because that's what she did. As a drunk, she said, no more wine because I'm a Nazir. She didn't mean to be a Nazir. She meant only to stop them from giving her more wine. So therefore, it's a neder for that one wine and not a complete Nazirus. Any questions before we go further?
No.
Jeff, you good? David,
Good.
hi, you good?
Yeah.
Very good.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Yes.
Good morning. Just give me 1 second. Very good. Give me 1 second. I'm just making sure I'm not getting anything as very good. Here we go further. Zok the Mishnah Baita. Hareini Nazir al Menasha Sheyehei Shoyse Yayin. If somebody says I am a Nazir on the condition that I'm allowed to drink wine, everybody see the problem with that. Hareini Nazir means what? I am now a Nazir that I can't drink wine or have any benefit from any of the wine products, grape products. I'm not allowed to be metama mace. I'm not allowed to be contaminated to a dead person. I'm not allowed to cut my hair. This guy says, Hareini knows I'm a nas on the condition that I can drink wine. Umetama mason on the condition that I can contract tumah from the dead. Zok the Mishnah, Harez and Nazir va'asur bekulan, and he's forbidden to everything. It's an all or nothing proposition. You said the words Hareini Nazir, that's it. You became a complete Nazir. What about the condition? We'll talk about that in a minute in the Gemara. Now he goes further. The guy declares himself a Nazir. Ruvain says, I am a Nazir. And then he says, Yodeya ani sheyesh Nazirus. I know that there's such a thing as Nazirus. I just declared myself a Nazir. But I didn't know that a Nazir is forbidden wine. In other words, it's the first time that he's learning the Daf Yomi. He heard about Nazirus. He turns himself into a Nazir. And then he finds out that a Nazir means you can't drink wine. He said, which means he's really saying, if I had known that in declaring Nazirus, I would not be able to drink wine, I would never have declared it in the first place. Says the Mishnah.
In the Chumash, that's all.
Says the Mishnah, Harei Aser. Nonetheless, he's Aser like from wine, like any other Nazir. But Rab Shimon Matir, Rab Shimon says you're allowed because he says you're not a Nazir at all. And this goes like the previous Mishnahs, right? If you remember, if you say one part Hareini Nazir, it makes you into a Nazir. The second part contradicts that Hareini Nazir, we ignore it. Rab Shimon says you look at the whole statement. The whole statement has to be taken a look. Clearly, he didn't know what he was talking about. The whole thing falls apart. We're now on 11A2. 11A2. Now, once again, another case. A person says, I am a Nazir. And then he says, Yodeya Anisha Nazir Asabiyayin. He says, I know that a Nazir is forbidden wine. I got that. Abel Savar, but I thought, Hayisi Shechachamim Matirimli. I thought that the rabbis would go ahead and allow me to be an exception and drink from wine. Why? Because I cannot live without wine. In other words, he belongs to the BJ, the Boca Walkers Wine Club. I can't live without wine. Boom. Stop laughing, Jeff. There you go. There we go. All right. I notice David is not saying anything. There we go. Right? Or maybe I knew that a Nazir is not allowed to be metama mace. But I thought I would get a heter, that Chachamim would let me off the hook because my job is to work in a cemetery. It says the Gemara, it says the Mishnah, Harei ze mutter, he's not a Nazir. In fact, he is not a Nazir. The Rab Shimon, Oyser, Rab Shimon says, no, he is a Nazir. Well, if you take a look at this, In the first half of the Mishnah, Rav Shimon said, in the case of, I know that the Nazir, but I didn't know that it's that Nazirus prohibits wine. Rav Shimon says it's not a Nazirus, and the Chachamim say it is a Nazir. And here in the second case, the Chachamim say it's okay, you're off the hook. And Rav Shimon says, no, you're usher. It seems to be contradicting their own opinions. So Zakti Gemara of a lift like Nami Rav Shimon Bereisha. If you take a look at the first case in the Mishnah, turn back to 11a1. Hareini Nazir I'm a Nazir on the condition that I could drink wine. Or that I could be Metamal Mason. Harez and Nazir, he is a Nazir, but also Bekulan, he's Nazir to everyone. You'll notice Rav Shimon doesn't say Matir, the Rav Shimon Matir, which means it seems that Rav Shimon seems to agree that in fact they are Nazirs. Says the Gemara, Rav Shimon should argue even in the first case. Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Cholol Koyin Rav Shimon operation. The truth is, Rav Shimon is arguing even in the first case. When it says after the second case, Rav Shimon Matir, it means Matir for the second case, where a guy made himself a Nazir but didn't know that Naziris forbids you from wine. And the second and the first case, where he makes a condition that I'm a Nazir on the condition that I can drink wine. He argues over there too, and he says, Ravina argues on Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. He says, Bereisha loy polig Rav Shimon. In fact, Rav Shimon does not argue in the first case, and he says in the first case where somebody says on the condition that I can drink wine, that he's still a Nazir. My tama, mishun dahavile masna masha kosev b'Torah, because it's a condition that's contrary to what is written in the Torah. And any condition that's contrary to what's written in the Torah, Tanai bottle. The Tanai is bottle. What's going on here? How did he start off this Nazirus? Hareini Nazir. I am a Nazir. So what did he just become when he said those two words? He became a Nazir. And a Nazir, by definition, is not allowed to drink wine. So the next words, Almanah Satishti Yayin, on the condition that I could drink wine, is a condition that is Minat Torah biblically against your acceptance of Nazirus. Says the Gemara, in that case, since the condition came after the words Hareini Nazir, I am a Nazir, when you became a Nazir, you automatically became forbidden biblically from wine. So your condition was Matzna Mashikosa B'Torah. Your condition was against what the Torah allows for Nazirus. And therefore the condition is meaningless, and there is no condition, and the Nazirus stays, even according to Reb Shimon. Even according to Reb Shimon. Says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who says above that remember Reb Shimon ben Levi said that Reb Shimon even holds in the ratio that if you say on condition that I can drink wine, he says he's arguing there too. He says it's no Nazirus. No, what is he going to do? It's Masna Mashikasa B'Torah. Amalach Hai Almanas Kichutztami. It doesn't mean Almanas. It means on the condition, not on the condition, except, meaning I am accepting on myself Nazirus except for wine. Since it's an all or nothing proposition, Nazirus has to be a complete acceptance of all the rules of Nazirus. No wine, no shaving, no being contaminated to the dead. If you go ahead and say, except for this, you're automatically not accepting the entire Nazirus. Then the whole thing falls apart. And Tani Kabase to Ravina. But in fact, we have a brisa that gives proof to Ravina that in fact, the Hareini Nazir part becomes a complete acceptance, and Almanas means conditionally, and the condition is against Mashikosim B'Torah, what is written in the Torah. Tadi Kabasi de Ravino. Omar, Hareini Nazir Almanas Sha'ata Shehei Shoyse Yayin. I'm a Nazir on condition that I'm permitted to drink wine. Or on the condition that I can be metabel amason, it can be tumble from the dead. He's a Nazir forbidden to all of them. Tonight, bottle, tonight is bottle. There's a barisa that's exactly like Ravina. And so there we go. All right, before we go further, does anybody have any questions? Or does it pretty much make sense? Jeff, Daddy, David, everybody good?
Yeah.
Do you mean to tell? I thought a Nazir is not supposed to drink wine automatically. So when I was saying, so how does that go now? It contradicts everything that we learned. Because the first thing we learn is.
Right. So David, so this is what, it's two ways of looking at this. One, you're exactly right. When you said the words Hareini Nazir, you became a full-fledged Nazir, and therefore, if you say words after that that contradict that, gone. The condition falls away, and the Nazir is blacked. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says the words almanas don't mean on condition; they mean accept, which means that I'm making an exception in my Hareini. I'm accepting Nazirus except for the piece of wine. Therefore, it says Rabbi Shimon Levi, it was never an acceptance in the first place. That's how he applies. It says Rabbi Shimon even says it's not Nazirus. But the Brisa comes along and says, no, the word almanas should be taken literally as a condition on my Hareini Nazir, and kol amasna amasha kosim b'Torah hatanai bottle. Any condition that is contrary to what is written in the Torah, the condition falls away, and therefore Reb Shimon would agree that he's a Nazir.
Yeah, so I would name him something else. If you don't drink wine, then you're not a Nazir. Come up with a different word. I don't know.
Right.
A Zamir, not a Nazir. Because to me, automatically a Nazir means you're not drinking wine.
That's correct. That's correct. But by the fact that he says, you see, David, you don't understand. We all don't understand. We all know what a Nazir is.
Mm-hmm.
We, like I said, none of us are Amaratzim, ignoramuses. We do not understand that at that time, there were people who literally did not know anything. They knew the concept of a Nazir, but didn't know what it meant. We have to remember, do you know why we say two Shmona Esreis, everybody? Why do we have a silent Shmona Esrei? And why do we then repeat the Shmona Esrei? Did you ever wonder? Right. The reason is because back in the day, there was only one Shmona Esrei. You know that? There was no silent Shmona Esrei. There was only the loud Shmona Esrei. You know why? Because most people didn't know how to daven. So they were yotzi. They fulfilled their obligation by listening to somebody else. You hear this, Jeff and David?
But those years ago, you didn't have to daven. You just bring korbanos.
But we forget that Shmona Esrei was put together by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. So that means during the second Beis Hamikdash, they did daven. They did.
But not the first one. Right.
Not the first. Davening as we know it began after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. That is correct. Okay, so, but we have to understand, we don't really conceptually grab this idea that most people were not educated whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
The public school system that the Jews created came much later And then came the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, and we were dispersed to all ends of the earth. There were people who, let me put it this way. I know somebody, Victor Goldenberg. The only reason he was born in Russia, the only way that he even knew that he was a Jew was that there was a J on his passport. He came to America. He didn't know what Pesach was. That's in our lifetime, gentlemen. There are people I will never forget. This is many years ago, actually. I was flying to Israel. I was on El Al. I was sitting next to a young lady, and I was davening, and I was saying actually the Ani Mamins at the end of davening. And the girl in Hebrew, an Israeli girl, complete Chiloni, complete, not Orthodox at all, complete Chiloni, turns to me and says, Ma Tomispala, what are you saying? What are you davening? And I said, I'm doing the Ani Mamins. And she says to me, my Ani Mamin, what are the Ani Mamins? I said, really? You're an Israeli, you're Jewish? This is the 13 articles of faith that define what it means to be a Jew. She was in her 20s. She had never seen the Ani Mamins.
Mm-hmm.
That told me everything about the divide in Israel. There is a secular section of Israel that has no idea why they're Jewish, and frankly has no idea why they're entitled to the land of Israel. That we have an historical connection to the land.
Absolutely, yeah. Unfortunately.
And these are people who have gone through the Israeli public schools and don't know the first thing about their people. Now picture this, Jay. So David, it's the same thing over here. You're making an assumption that everybody knew that Nazir.
1699. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? You're making an assumption that everybody knows what a Nazir is, that you can't drink wine. That is not an assumption. You can't make that assumption.
But yet we're learning from something that from 4,000 years ago, 5,000. We're
Correct.
not learning today's Torah. We're learning something from years ago.
Correct. But we are learned.
So they did know something.
All they knew was that there was a Nazir. They did not know what the details were. You see this all the time. You see this all the time, and it's the way you need to understand the Gemaras. Why is it that the Gemaras was so afraid of the Amaratzim not separating the tithes, Truma, Meiser, and all that? Because they just let it go. We do not understand that today is an anomaly. Today is an anomaly that so many, do you know that there are more people learning today in our generation than in the last 2,000 years? Let me repeat that. Yeah. There are more people who are sitting and learning today who doing the Daf Yomi than there were people sitting and learning, period, over the last 2,000 years. This generation is learning more Torah than any generation prior to it since the destruction of the Second Temple. And that's after the Holocaust. It's remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you see it, and that's how you have to understand these Gemaras. Otherwise, you could ask yourself the question, David, why are there so many arguments? Didn't they know what they did before? I mean, the Torah was given 3,500 years ago. For 1,500 years before the second Churban Beis Hamikdash, they were doing Yiddishkeit. What did they do? They forgot everything? The answer is yes. The war came. They got destroyed. They got dispersed. They forgot. And now they're arguing.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, yes.
Otherwise,
Okay.
your question could be on the entire Gemara.
Right.
But the answer is, we know this. The Holocaust came and all the traditions went by the board. Many of the traditions we have today, right, are new, are reworked, because nobody really remembers exactly what took place in Europe. Anyways, let's go.
Okay.
Yep, but it was a good question. Yodea ani sha'nozir osa b'yayin. Yodea ani sha'nozir osa b'yayin. If somebody said in our this we said in our Mishnah, somebody says I'm a Nazir, and I knew when I was declaring Nazirus that the Nazir is forbidden from wine, but I expected the rabbis to let me off the hook because they know I can't live without wine. Or they know I work in the cemetery and I need to be metamal ames, right? So now we're on 11.8.3. This would seem to mean that the initial intention was to adapt only some of the Nazir's prohibitions. So therefore the Chachamim were expected to rule that he's a Nazir, and Rab Shimon should be expected to rule that he's not a Nazir. Yet the Mishnah says the exact opposite. So the Gemara says, V'amrat Reisha. But you said in the earlier part in the Reisha that if I knew that I was a Nazir, but I didn't know that the Nazir is forbidden wine, also Rab Shimon Mati. The Chachamim said, nonetheless, he's a Nazir, and Rab Shimon permits. Why then in the case where it's the opposite, right, where he's claiming the same intention, essentially, that I know, but the Chachamim, I'm hoping that the Chachamim are going to let me off the hook, that the rabbis say that he's not a Nazir, and Reb Shimon says he is a Nazir, it's a contradiction. Zakti Gemara, an easy answer. Eimanami, we have it wrong. Hareza also Reb Shimon Mati. In fact, you're right. The rabbis are the one who forbid, and it's Reb Shimon who permits. And we had it wrong in the Mishnah. But now says the Gemara, no. Don't switch around the rulings. How do you explain this? Hasam, over there in the ratio, we're now on 11b1. Yud Aleph Amid Beis. Ratio where he claims that he didn't know that a Nazir is forbidden from wine. In fact, he's saying that I'm vowing from Nazir from only one of this Nazir's prohibitions, according to the Chachamim who say that a person is a full-fledged Nazir, even if he only vows from one thing. Right? Haravi Nazir v'asir, he's a Nazir. Rab Shimon Rab Shimon was very clear before that you're not a Nazir until you accept upon yourself all the restrictions of Nazirus. Mutter, this guy is therefore mutter, because he's essentially saying, I didn't know that I was prohibited from wine. So Rab Shimon says, in other words, you're saying that you would mask it to be a Nazir from not touching the dead and not cutting your hair, but you wouldn't be masking from Nazir, from wine, therefore you're not a Nazir. The Chachamim say, if you accept one Isser, one prohibition, you've accepted all the prohibitions. That's the Reisha. The Seifa, Denoda Mikula V'ishtul Michada. It's a case where he accepted the entire gamut of Nazirus. No cutting the hair, no being metamal mace, and no drinking wine. It's only afterwards that you now want to come and petition a Chacham to release you from one of the restrictions. Lirabanan di Amri. According to the Rabbanan that say the other way, when becoming a Nazir, if you accept one restriction, you become a complete Nazir. Then on the other side is the same thing. When you want to petition to be released from one of the Isurim, from one of the prohibitions, Minayu Ishtri, then you're being released from all of them. The same way when you're coming into Nazirus, says the Chachamim. If you accept one of the prohibitions, you're a complete Nazir. So too on the way out. If you want to annul, you want to get released from one of the prohibitions, you're getting released from all of the prohibitions. When you want to, says when you want to become a Nazir, you have to accept all the prohibitions. Same thing over here. When you want to get released from your Nazirus, you have to get released from every single particular prohibition from the Nazirus. The same way you don't become a Nazir until you accept every single particular rule of Nazirus. So too, when you want to get released, you have to be released from each part, each variable of the Nazirus. The Rabbanan say no. Just like you could become a Nazir by merely accepting one of the prohibitions, so you can get released completely from the Nazirus by releasing yourself from one of the prohibitions. That's why Reb Shimon holds it's aser. Did that make sense? Before I go to the third resolution. Jeff, David, made sense? Good.
Yeah.
Good. The Iba is saying, Benidre Arnosin Komifligi. They're arguing about the rules of unavoidable vows. Okay? A vow that was unavoidable. And we're going to a condition that gets triggered unavoidably. We're going to get into this in a minute. Uplukta de Shmuel v'Ravasi. And they're arguing in the machlokes of Shmuel and Ravasi. It's not, because we learned in the Mishnah. Arba the Darim Hitiru Chachamim. The Chachamim permitted 4 vows, meaning they said they are not vows. They don't even get started. Nidre Zeruzin, bargaining vows. That means if you're doing business with another guy and you're making vows to try to conduct the business, but everybody knows the vows are meaningless, they are meaningless. Nidre Havai, exaggerated vows, where you exaggerate. Okay, it's meaningless. Nidre Shkagais, unwitting vows. Okay, he made a mistake. In other words, a person vows that a certain loaf of bread will be usher to him if he eats anything the previous day, and he thought that he didn't eat the previous day, but it turns out that he did eat the previous day. So the whole basis of his vow was a mistake. And nidre einzin, unavoidable vows. These are vows are made with a condition, and the condition was fulfilled through an unavoidable thing. A person says, my property is forbidden to you for benefit if you do not attend my banquet. If you don't come to my banquet, if you don't come to the wine club, right, you're forbidden to come into my house. And then it's not that he didn't come to the wine club, it's that it rained terribly and he couldn't make it to the thing. It was an unavoidable occurrence that forced him not to make it. So Zabti Gemara, V'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rabasi, Arbet Nevarim Alolu, Tzarich and Sheila L'Chachamim. These four are in fact vows, and they need you to go to the rabbi to get them released, to be meifeneder. Ki amin and kamei de Shmuel. But when Rabbi Yehuda, said this to Shmuel, Amali Tanakasi Yetiru Chachamim. The Tana states that the Chachamim said that these 4 vows are permitted without having to go to a Rav to be mataneder. And you say, I have to do, it is in fact, it is Nedarim, it is a vows, and you have to go to a Rav to be made for Neder to annul the Nedarim. And now the Gemara explains, Rabbanan Savri Kishmuel, the Rabbanan clearly hold like Shmuel, and therefore he is not a Neder, it is not what he called, it is not a neder. Okay, and Rab Shimon Kirabasi, Rab Shimon holds like Rabasi that in fact they are nedarim, and you have to go to a rov to go ahead and get them out to neder. One more Mishnah. Hareini Nazir va'olai legalach Nazir. I am a Nazir, and by the way, I also have to go ahead. I have to provide the kabbanos, the sacrifices for a Nazir to shave his head. V'shama chaveroi v'amar, and his chaver heard him, his friend heard him. He said, "Vani and I." Va'olai, and on me, legalak Nazir, to provide the sacrifices for a Nazir to shave his head. If they were smart, they both become Nazirim. Umagichim zeh, they provide the shaving one for another. They each provide for the other. Ruvain for Shimon and Shimon for Ruvain, the kabbanos, the sacrifices to shave. The imlav, if they don't buy for each other, they got to find Levi and Yehuda to go ahead and provide the kabbanos in order to fulfill their vow. So, what happens if he just says like this? Shama chaveroi, the chaveroi hears, v'amar, and he says, v'ani, and I, mahu, what's the din? Ani akula dibura mashma. In other words, do I say, Shimon says, Shimon hears Ruvain say, I will be a Nazir, and I will provide somebody else with the kabbanos for the Naziris. So when Shimon says, Vani and I, Vania Kula Deburi Mashma, is he going ahead and speaking the entire thing that Ruvain said? So Shimon has now taken on to A, be a Nazir, and B, provide the kabbanos for a second person. Oidilma Apale Debura Mashma. He's only referring to Palgi Debura, half of the words. And if you want to say Shimon only was referring to when he said Vani and I, he was only dealing with to a partial declaration. Is he talking about the first or part of the second? Is he talking about that he's accepting upon himself to become a Nazir? Or is he only accepting upon himself to provide the kabbanos to a Nazir to bring? Zakti Gemara, Tashma, we can learn from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that when the friend hears Ruvain say, I will be a Nazir and provide sacrifices, kabbanos to somebody else, and he says, Vani and I, va'olai legalach Nazir, and I, and it's incumbent on me to provide kabbanos to somebody else. If they were smart, they would provide for each other the kabbanos. From the fact that the Mishnah says, and I, and then upon me, Shmamina v'ani by itself is a palag dibura, is only talking about half the declaration. But that only tells us it's half the declaration. Which half? If the Shimon says, Vani and I, is he talking about that I'm going to become a Nazir? Or is he talking about that I am going to provide the kabbanos for a friend of mine? So Amri ain't Palgi Debura Mashma. You're right. Yes. The word from our Mishnah, Vani va'olai, and I will provide, tells us the word Vani only applies to one part. Mahu Areisha Yasefa. Which part is it talking about? 11b3. This is where we're going to end. 11b3. What's it talking about? The first part or the last part? The part about becoming a Nazir or the part about providing somebody else with their kabbanos? So says the Gemara, we can learn it again from the Mishnah. Where it says Vani, and I, and it's on me to provide the sacrifices, the kabbanos, for somebody else to shave. From here we see that the word ani is going on the first declaration about being a Nazir. And therefore the word vani means that I'm taking on to myself also to be a Nazir like Ruvain. Amalei Rav Huna b'reidei Rabbi Shua l'Rava. Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, said to Rava, Mimai da'achi, how do you know this? Li'olam emelach, I can tell you, va'ani akula dibura. And I refers to the entire declaration, both being a Nazir and providing the kabbanas. V'imishum v'alai, then why did I need the extra word v'alai and I? My kamer v'alai, b'ha milsa. Immediately, because he's just repeating the matter. You know how we speak, how human beings speak. When they want to put an emphasis on something they're doing, they simply repeat what they're saying. It's like doing an underline on their words. So who says it means palga dibura, that we split it like this? Maybe Va'ani goes on everything. Va'alai is merely underlying that he's accepting both to be a Nazir and to bring the kabbanas for somebody else. And Rab Huna the Sembirei Rabbi Yeshua brings proof. The Eloi Tema Achi, the Tani Sefer, it says later in our Mishnah on Shabbos' daf, to be totally honest, but we're going to do it on Sunday, right? Harei olai legaleach chatzi nazir. It's incumbent on me to provide for half the shaving of a nazir, meaning half the kabbanas. Shama chavera v'amar, and that's what Ruvain said. And Shimon says, "Va'ani olai legalech chatzi nazir," and it's incumbent on me to provide for the shaving of a half a nazir. Is he mechayiv to pay for half of it? Hasa imi yikatarti mili. There are two matters, right? For him to repeat. Ela mai kama alai. Why is he saying what he called? Alai baha milsa. He's only underlying the milsa. Hachinami ki kamar ala baha milsa. Over here, he's also coming to underline the milsa. In other words, the word va'alai does not bring anything. It's merely an underline on the acceptance. Amala Rava, no. Hakim hashta. That the first alai in the first part of our Mishnah is necessary because Va'ani and I does not by itself tell me anything of what he's accepted from the Ruvain's declaration. Sefer light tzricha. In the Sefer, it's not needed because there's only one obligation being put on. Tani Sefer delight tzricha. Then we're going to say that the Mishnah is saying something that's unnecessary. Mishum reisha the tzricha, because the Mishnah is saying it. Elai amrit reisha light tzricha. But if you tell me in the Mishnah it's not necessary, because the word va'ani goes on everything. Sefer light tzricha. In the Sefer, it's not necessary. Tani reisha the light tzricha, but Tani Sefer light tzricha. Does the Mishnah then teach us an extra word needlessly in the first part just to underline? Would the Sefer again teach us the same thing? So therefore, Rava says, no, Va'ani goes on the first. I will be a Nazir. The Alai will go on the second, that I will provide kabbanas to somebody else. Very good. Here is where we end. Amar Rav Yitzchak,